There is some weird stuff happening with Iowa State athletics right now. I would say outside of LSU, Iowa State has probably had the weirdest 6-month stretch in college athletics with the things going on within that athletics department. It's always LSU. It's always LSU. But today I actually want to talk about what's happening within Iowa State athletics department and kind of put together a timeline of just what has happened there recently, because there is weird stuff going on. You can really break this down into 3 different sports. So you had football, your head coach left, women's gymnastics, they shut that program down, and now women's basketball, where that entire roster has basically entered the transfer portal. And in this short span of time, you have had your athletic director sit down in front of a camera like I'm doing today, even though that's my job, that is not his job. And he's handled this in an odd way that sort of shines a light of what that athletic department is like. So here is what has happened with Iowa State. But before we get started, I do have to shamelessly ask you to subscribe to this channel because I really just want you to do it. That's pretty much it. That's the reason. It would be awesome. It would be cool. I do think I should acknowledge I went to the University of Iowa. Obviously, that's a rival. I am going to do my best not to be biased. I'd like to think I'm normal and well-adjusted and can manage that, but sometimes you never know. So if you spot my biases in here, that's fine. So I think we should start with this timeline chronologically and begin with football, because I do think that's the easiest to explain what has happened there. Iowa State had a decent season by Iowa State measures, lots of injuries. They may not have finished exactly the way they wanted to, but Matt Campbell left for the Penn State job at the conclusion of that season. This one feels kind of cut and dry to me, pretty much self-explanatory. You had a head coach at a Power 4 school that is historically bad. He brought them to the peak of what you were going to be able to get from Iowa State. There was always going to be limits. You could never achieve everything you wanted there. And the right job came around with Penn State that provided all the right resources, everything that he would need to succeed. And so he just took a better job that's considered one of the premier jobs in college football. This makes sense. This happens a lot in college football. Matt Campbell then bought an ad in the local newspaper, the Des Moines Register, and was like, I love you guys. Thank you for the memories. This was the best time ever. And then he took all the players and left. He did that. So when I say that he took all their players and left, he took all their players. They had 17 players left on that roster. 17. That is not ideal. But in the way that college sports works, you see this more and more and more. So Iowa State hired somebody else, recovered. He took players from his roster. He brought them there. And according to Jamie Pollard, they have enough players to field a football team. Him saying that doesn't necessarily give me a lot of confidence in that football team. You're like, yeah, I would hope so. Yeah. Good news. Great. The bar is the floor. But Iowa State does have a football team. Allegedly, according to Jamie Pollard. Which, I probably should mention this, Jamie Pollard is the athletics director, in case you did not know. So this is simply college sports. This is the nature of being the head coach at Iowa State versus being the head coach at Penn State. Nothing to be too concerned about, but I do think it's important for kind of the timeline of what has happened with Iowa State. And now a few months later, after Matt Campbell left, that's where we got the real juicy hot goss story out of Iowa State athletics. Iowa State women's gymnastics was having a pretty awful season. They were having a rough time under a head coach who had no previous experience as a head coach in collegiate gymnastics, and things just weren't looking great for this program. And I have to be honest, I don't follow Iowa State gymnastics that closely. Iowa State women's gymnastics made an announcement they would simply not be competing anymore. They were pulling out of the rest of their meets and their season was done. That is a very, very shocking thing to see in college athletics because it costs money to do that. You lose money to do that. So when Iowa State made this announcement, they said it was related due to injuries, that they simply just did not have enough athletes to compete, so they were going to cancel the season, get healthy, and that was sort of what we heard. That same time, we are hearing players and parents of players and people around this program come out on their own social media and be like, that's not true. There is clearly a big divide between the coaches, the athletic department, the athletes, and the parents of the athletes here. And that is why they're canceling it. This is not injury related. It is drama related. And then Jamie Pollard does his favorite thing in the world, and he sits down in front of a camera and he's like, hey, Iowa State athletics, we have decided we will no longer have a women's gymnastics program. There have been a lot of issues. We want to help the student athletes. We're so grateful for them. We're going to help everyone get their eligibility back and go in the portal. And he says all these things that sound really good. And then he says a couple things that you're like, oh, I don't necessarily know if I love how you're phrasing that. things along the line of like, this has kind of always been a problem program for us. We've had issues in the women's gymnastics program before that we don't seem to have in our other sports that just keep repeating. So we felt like it was best to just move on from this program because of all the issues we're having. He sort of shifted some of the blame onto the student athletes, which I like don't appreciate at all. You were choosing to shut down that program. And so he sits down and he makes this video. And the reaction from people around Iowa State's women's gymnastics is obviously not favorable. They were like, this is not our fault. This is your fault. We came and asked you for help. You did not help us. And so a lot of them have spoken out. I want to read an excerpt from an Iowa State women's gymnastics athlete who wrote an anonymous letter to gymnasticsnow.com about her experience within the Iowa State women's gymnastics program. I will put the link to her full article in the comments. So this is what she said. I'm cutting out stuff that's not necessary. For the last 4 months, we as a team have made difficult and mature decisions to respectfully bring physical and emotional safety concerns and issues forward to our senior associate athletics director. We came forward through emails and forums. We wrote pages and pages about everything that had been going on in the gymnastics program. We spoke about not feeling safe, that we hadn't been prepared well to be able to successfully and safely compete in our first meet in 3 weeks, that we are not listened to by our head coach, and that her interactions with our team and assistant coaches were often incredibly hostile and unprofessional, and we had to be the adults in many situations because our head coach was not able to be professional. That is a very interesting case study where these athletes are saying, we came forward and we asked you for help. We told you we weren't safe. They're not even saying like we're having a bad time. Physically, we cannot compete because we are not prepared. And gymnastics is a crazy dangerous sport. And there was nothing done by Iowa State to kind of fix those errors. And that was 3 weeks before their first meet of the season. I just think this goes to show clearly some fundamental issues within the Iowa State athletics department that like stuff like this is happening. It's not like the most rare thing in the world to see a college athletics department cut programs. We saw that a lot with the COVID-19 pandemic, and most of that was purely for financial reasons, where athletics departments weren't making any money, and most athletics departments operated at a loss anyway. So like the University of Iowa, for example, had to cut swimming and diving and men's gymnastics and a couple programs where that is sort of the most common reason you see for programs being cut. It's just simply financial reasons. To have a Power 4 university cut a program for like problem reasons that aren't financial, it's really, really interesting and rare. And so that alone, I think, is enough for a conversation of how did we get to this point? Like, what were the failures here? But I think it also needs to be combined with what we've seen recently over the last week with the Iowa State women's basketball team. So Iowa State women's basketball has been in the headlines for about a week now because 10 out of their 12 returning players have decided to enter the transfer portal. That's a very, very high number when there's no coaching change involved, and there is not, and that's important. We'll come back to it. Iowa State Athletics Director Jamie Pollard sat down again and filmed another video and was like, hey, men's basketball, that was the best. The best of times. This was awesome. Women's basketball, yeah, stuff's happening. It's not ideal, but that's just the nature of college athletics. People want to make more money. They want more playing time. It's just what college athletics is. But we are sticking with our coach. You guys don't need to worry about it. Also, there are other teams that are losing players like us, like Iowa over there. And everyone was like, why are you saying that? What is this man doing? In this whole video, by the way, he has elevator music on in the background. We don't know why. Bad PR week for Iowa State Athletics Department. So this video came out the same day that Audie Crooks announced she was entering the transfer portal. Now, Audie Crooks is the face of Iowa State athletics at this point. She was the number 2 scorer in women's college basketball last year. Like, this is a phenomenal player who is arguably one of the most recognized faces in women's college basketball. And clearly they released it knowing she was entering the portal, and they wanted to have a direct response to that. Now, the pushback to this video, which is the reason we're making this video right now, because honestly, I think that if Jamie Pollard had not filmed and released that video and not said the things he had said, I don't necessarily know if this conversation would have gotten to the point that it is right now. However, what I want to talk about specifically was one comment in particular, which was Audie Crooks' mother commenting on the video and saying like something along the lines of, maybe you should try to talking to the student athletes next time, insinuating that Jamie Pollard had not spoken to Audie Crooks, which I think is a very, very crazy concept of a Power 4 school's athletic director not speaking to arguably the most famous athlete on campus. Now, this is all following a year that was disappointing for Iowa State women's basketball. They started the year preseason top 10. They got knocked out the first round of the tournament. Injuries were a very, very big issue for Iowa State, but nonetheless, a pretty disappointing year following another disappointing year where Iowa State had high expectations and then got knocked out earlier in the tournament as well. When disappointing years roll around at established programs like Iowa State, where they've had a head coach in Bill Finelli for 30 plus years, you very rarely see this many players enter the portal, which is why you saw that response video from Jamie Pollard. Now, I'm filming this as of Monday, April 6th, when the women's basketball portal has opened, so we will see more players move around. There might be schools that have numbers as high as Iowa State, but the only other school I'm seeing that from at this moment is Tennessee, who has clear cultural issues with Kim Caldwell. And so for a school to not undergo a coaching change and have this many players into the portal, you have to wonder, what is the culture like there, especially when you tie in the fact of what happened with women's gymnastics. Jamie Pollard goes out and films this video that he looks really bad at because he's taking unnecessary digs at Iowa, another school in the Big 12. He's bringing more attention to this situation in a way that's certainly not helping. And the feedback that I have seen from Iowa State fans online is they are not happy with Jamie Pollard at this moment. That the way he is behaving and handling the situation, they don't think is doing any good for Iowa State. And I'm seeing people say, I'm not going to buy women's basketball season tickets next year because clearly it's time for a change in head coach. Things are not moving in the right direction. He's been there very long. We're ready to see him go. And Jamie Pollard's not willing to make that move, which he made very clear in this video that he was sticking with Finelli. That was not going to change. And so there definitely seems to be frustration on the Iowa State side of things with how this situation was handled. The reason I wanted to make this video was to put this timeline together because I think they're all interesting stories on their own, with maybe the exception of football. I don't know if it's that interesting. Okay, so you only have 17 players on your football team, and then you shut down your women's gymnastics team, and then 10 out of 12 returning players leave for women's basketball. Individually, those are things we're talking about, but together kind of shows a pattern. And so I'm not necessarily stating that I think there are major problems within Iowa State athletics. I'm not familiar enough with Iowa State athletics to say that. But I can look at something and say, okay, well, that is interesting that this keeps happening in different ways through this same athletics department. So obviously I think this reflects Jamie Pollard because why are you filming these videos? And I've seen discussion outside of Iowa State fandom of being I look at what's happening right now and I see Iowa State turning into kind of a MAC school just because objectively Iowa State is kind of considered one of the lower tier Power 4 schools when it comes to resources and just history there. And so I don't necessarily think that is the case. I think this is kind of more a clear systematic issue within that athletics department because for 3 programs to have to start from scratch, football, you're starting from scratch. They have to replace women's gymnastics with another sport. I imagine it'll be women's wrestling, but you're literally starting over, a new entire sport. And now women's basketball, you're having to do the same thing. I just think that reflects a pattern. And so if you're an Iowa State fan, I would love for you to comment your perspective on this because for me, I don't follow Iowa State that closely. I do think it's interesting to see what happens in their athletics department, especially because, they're in the same state as my favorite team. And, you just kind of want to compare and see what's going on with both schools. I'm really curious what you think about Jamie Pollard, about the way these 3 things have played out. Do you think they're connected or do you not? Because it's just a really interesting case study right now of college athletics. And if you guys really want, we can try to talk about what's happened with LSU. Spoiler alert, they're spending a crazy amount of money. But that was my video on Iowa State. If you liked this video, please let me know. If you didn't, I don't know what to tell you. I did my very best. I'm doing the best I can. And you know what? My sore throat, I still have it a little bit. So I'm so brave. Make sure you share, follow, subscribe, comment. I'm sure there are other things. I'm sure some of those things don't even exist. But we will be back later this week with another video. Probably. I don't know. This sore throat is really taking me out.